The first Sunday I stood before you, I shared a little bit about the Rennick family and how both of my boys are adopted, and I sang a song for you, if you remember that Sunday. I'm not going to trouble you with that today. But if you'll recall, it was a song I wrote for my oldest son, Philip, and it had to do with some words of really comfort, some words that I had wanted to share with him as a father as we began to build a home together. The chorus goes like this. And I'll be there to walk with you. I'll be there to show I care. I'll be there to cry with you. I'll be there and everywhere I'll be there. You see, in 2001, in the Rennick household, we began building a home. We began building a foundation together to realize that we were to start a journey together about building family, and then eventually that would add a little bit more as Dustin became a part of our family. We began building a house together, and how significant that would mean something for us together as three individuals. You see, my only desire for my sons is this, and it still remains the same. I want to walk with them. I want to cry with them. I want to show them that in the midst of life, they're not alone. That as long as I have breath in this body, I will go wherever they are going. You see, of course, things are never perfect, and we begin to realize that sometimes within any family, within any relationship, there can be some tension that rises up. These are those moments when we start to realize that we're growing together. I often realize and have discovered with my sons that, there wouldn't be the nitpicking that goes on. There wouldn't be the tensions that happen within families and within relationships if we didn't care for each other in the first place. I know that sounds a little bit ironic there because often we want to bully one another. No, it's not about that within a relationship or even within a family. When we start to feel a little bit on edge, we are in a place to where we realize that God is leading us to a moment of growth. Over the next few weeks here, and as we started last week, we want to share with you the series on what it means to mend a fence, that when those opportunities or when those moments come up where there's tensions in our lives, how can we grow from them? How do we work together in the midst of life when there seems to be some friction or rub that gets us the wrong way? So we're talking about mending fences. Not just mending fences in a way that make things a little bit better, make it look nice, make the house look pretty in front. No, we're talking about mending fences as a metaphor. As a metaphor for rebuilding and strengthening the relationships that we have, not only with those whom we work with or are in contact with from the day to day, but also those for whom we might be in contact with in our own homes. That's our family. What does it mean to also be in contact or within resolution within our neighbor? And then ultimately we'll talk about how does God want to restore a sense of resolution, reconciliation with us. Mending fences. It's about rebuilding something. And even more so, it's about building that house in which God has called us to be a part. It's about overcoming those conflicts in lives that realize in the first place we just need to own our stuff. How often through life do we blame someone else and say, you know what, it's their fault for the condition in my life. If so-and-so would have done this, I wouldn't have been feeling so bad about myself. If I would have just gone this direction, maybe I wouldn't be sitting where I am today. No. Own your stuff. Where you are today is because of the choices in which you have made, in which the choices we have all made together. There's nothing wrong with that because the goodness that comes from that is God strengthens us each step at a time as we walk forward in life. You see, we own our stuff because we come to understand that we acknowledge what's before us. We acknowledge that there's a conflict. We acknowledge that there's an intention of some sort. We acknowledge when God is good. And when we put that together, we begin to realize that when there are conflicts in our lives, we can either put them behind our back We can go behind someone's back and start gossiping about the whole situation, or we can confront it. We can confront the conflict in our lives that allows us to realize that this isn't something that we are not alone in, that we're sharing it together, and that if we don't get this together, we might as well not do anything in the first place. And that's what allows us then to accept the situations of who we are, to accept the situation of possibility for new life, for transformation, for new hope. So as we talk about mending fences, we want to talk about the fact that even though we seem to hurt those in our midst, it often seems kind of awkward that those we love the most, we hurt the most. So why not just go a little bit further and invest some interest into the folks who are around us day in and day out, whether they be the ones within our workforce, those within our neighborhood, those within our homes, and ultimately with a home that God resides in us. You see, when it comes to the stories of family is probably the most important thing that reminds us of who we are individually. And I'm probably one of the most non-traditional family persons that there are. I've got 2 kids who I'm raising on my own because I chose to have a family. Pretty crazy. I could be doing something else out on my own, doing whatever I want, but no. I wanted to bring the boys in to be a part of life, to realize that building a home together means about building a sense of identity, about creating a legacy. And it's a legacy that reminds us that we are never forgotten in the midst of who we are. So when we look at the Bible, we start to see some understandings of the importances of what family means. We can flip through the pages of the Bible and we can find story after story about different families. A couple that come to mind are the stories of the prodigal son, the family in which the son decides to write off his family, to write off his dad and say, give me the inheritance that's worthy of me, and I'm going to take off and have a good time. And then there's another story about 2 brothers. 2 brothers who are so much at odds that the one brother decides to lie and cheat against him, to earn his birthright because the other brother's older, to lie to his dad because his dad is sick and blind, and to be blessed with that birthright of the older son, and to use his mother in such a way that manipulates the family so that he could be the leading one to go forth and to take over the world. But that's not always the case, because it's not always about me. But it does always get to the point to where we have to own our own stuff, as we've mentioned. You see, family is so important in the Bible that it looks at it in a couple different perspectives. In the Old Testament, when we look at the Bible there, it talks about the sense of how the family is like a tribe. It's not just the 3 of us as the Rennicks. It's not David, Philip, and Dustin. No, it's the tribe that gets even bigger when it comes within the Rennick clan, the Ruggiero clan, which is my sister's name now, my brother. That is the tribe of who we are. And then when we get to the New Testament, it's not only just the tribe, but it's also the sense of lineage that makes the family grow bigger and stronger. If you open up the first page of the New Testament there, and I promise you, I will never preach from the first page of the New Testament. There's this huge lineage of people that are related to one another and how they're connected, who they belong to each other, and how they are connected as a family because of their strength. They are whole. See, as you look at that, it's a family that's not just connected by blood, but also through marriage, through adoption, through connection, through who we are as a people of faith. See, family is about building strong relationships with one another. It's where spiritual nurturing begins and continues. You see, the Bible talks about these stories of a young boy who thinks he can go out and take the world out on his own. You remember the story of the prodigal son that I just mentioned. He goes up to his dad one day and he says, give me my inheritance. I'm 18. I can take the world on now. Right. I think it was Bill Cosby must have been the dad in there, because he's like, sure, son, here you go. And it always strikes me kind of wrong. That story rubs me when it comes to relationships within families there, because if I remember correctly, when it comes to getting your inheritance, what has to happen to the person who had the money in the first place? They got to die. How many of your sons and daughters have wished that you were dead? Am I the only guy in the house? No. Can you imagine when the father heard his son say, I want my inheritance? Did he feel like he wanted to just collapse? Or was it like, okay, boy, you want a taste of this world? I'll give you a shot. And maybe that's the greatest gift that that father gives to that youngest son, is to say, okay, go. I'll let you go. And just to fast forward the whole story there, we know what goes on. The kid goes off, he spends all the money, wine, women, and song, and he has a great time, and he's all out of money, and there's no more ATMs, there's no more parents. And he has this realization to himself that, I've screwed up. I need to go home, I need to make amends. And what happens when he gets home? The dad greets him, welcomes him. I can't begin to imagine how long that father stood out there looking out the window. And I think there's a part in there too where the mother's probably doing the same thing. She's just not written into the story. But I'm sure how often did she jab her husband each night and say, why did you give him that money and let him go in the first place? See, when it comes to family, we have a sense of connection that cannot be torn apart. And finally, when that boy comes to his senses, he comes home and he's greeted. The older son gets ticked off. How come you're welcoming him? I'm waiting for you to die, get my stuff. And Dad says, this brother of yours that was lost is now found. He once was lost, but now he's back into the family because he never was disconnected from the family in the first place. And then there's the story we read this morning, and I just, we had just a snippet here of it that we heard out of the book of Genesis about these two brothers, about Esau and Jacob, and how, the one brother here wants to claim for himself whatever he can get, and he's not going to go through his dad, but he goes through his dad to get to his brother because his brother's the older one, and he wants to get his birthright. He wants to do what the youngest kid does in the New Testament in the story of the prodigal son. So he gets that birthright, and he goes off, and finally when the older brother comes to his senses, he's mad. He wants to go out and he wants to kill his brother. Anybody ever want to do that? We've all been there. And the whole story of Jacob is this moment in which he falls asleep one night, but he can't really sleep because he's wrestling with this angel throughout the night there. It's kind of a wonderful metaphorical story of insomnia. How many of us have not wrestled in the night with some sort of issue that has bugged us? Of how we can mend a fence with those whom we love, or to get through an issue. And the story goes that the angel kicks his butt, throws his hip out of socket, and he's got this wonderful limp that comes about him. But when it comes to catching up with his brother again welcomes him to make right the relationship, and he says, okay, let this journey continue and I will go alongside of you. That is what family is about. And I'll be the first to admit to you, families aren't perfect. They're dysfunctional. They're perfect. I've got a lot of models out there that I look to go, gosh, I wish we could be like them. And then people say, David, gosh, I wish we had such a perfect family like you do. And I say, come here, let's talk. You see, family is only as good as we work together with one another, with those whom we love, and with the connections that we have together. It's a journey in which we are on our way, in which we walk alongside with each other. It's about owning the stuff that we have, and it's about growing together as family, as a community of faith. Last week, we were introduced to a father and a son, George and Sam. And this is such a difficult story for me to watch. And maybe for some of us too, because we start seeing ourselves in the characters of this story. Last week, George was told that he was going to die of cancer and has about 3 months to live. And the whole thing that he really wants to do is to mend the relationship that he can have with his son Sam. And in doing that, he's going to rebuild the house that his father gave to him. Can you imagine living in the place in which someone has given to you, although you hate that person because they made you feel smaller than small throughout your whole life? George wants to rebuild this house because he wants to give it a sense of meaning and purpose, of reconciliation, not only for himself, because he sees himself raising his son in the same way in which he had been raised. He wants to catch up with his son in such a way that reminds him, too, that his son is important and significant. So we saw this tension last week as George says that Sam's coming to stay with him for the summer. They're going to build this house together. And everything's not perfect. They start walking together in life alongside each other. And one day, George finds a bag of marijuana from his son there. And that would never be an experience in our own lives, would it? Or find something, egregious about our own children. He finds a bag of marijuana and he gets rid of it. And his son goes nuts. And then George reminds his son of the importance of the connection of what it means to be a father, and that he didn't want to be the father that raised him. I invite you to see this interaction between the two of them.
You can't make me think. No! Oh, God! Sit down! Sam! That's child abuse! You're beating out people in prison for what you just did to me!
My dad used to play this game. I never really even understood what it was till after he was gone.
I was holding for somebody else who wasn't even mine.
The game was to make me smaller than he was. Smaller, always smaller. No matter what. He could be almost invisible as a human being, but I still had to be smaller. So that if I got good grades in school, then I was a pussy for not playing football, or if I cut my hair for him, it was never short enough, or if I shaved my head, then I looked like a psycho. I never wanted to get never. And if he couldn't make me smaller with words, I'll have to pay him back. Sam, I won't ever hit you. Never. I don't want you smaller. I want you to be happy. You're not. Not here with me, not home with your mother, not alone, not anywhere. You're what I was most of my life, Sam. I see it in your eyes, in your sleep, in your answer to everything. You're barely alive. I'm not even listening. You know the great thing, though? Is that change can be so constant that you don't even feel a difference until there is one. It can be so slow that you don't know that your life is better or worse until it is. Or it can just blow you away, make you something different in an instant. It happened to me. Build this house with me. Come on.
See, sometimes that change just occurs when we least expect it, and then you get there. stop living in the negative pieces of your world that have created who you are. But because of the past, know that you can look into the future and something that's even more whole. You see, when it comes to rebuilding a house, when it comes to mending a fence in our lives, in a connection or relationship with someone else, sometimes we need to knock down some walls. We need to get the clutter out of our lives. So I would suggest that in doing so, we remember whom we've hurt. We remember those whom we have done wrong with. So we go to them. It's a journey. It's a journey that begins by coming to oneself and admitting our own mistakes and saying that I will not let this happen to me anymore. It's also a journey that brings us to the person for whom we have wronged, even if we're the person themselves who has been wronged. It's also that moment to accept forgiveness, to extend it, to receive it, to accept it, and to know that in that sense of forgiveness comes reconciliation, comes a reception of hope, as it reminds us of that chorus of the song. And I'll be there to walk with you. I'll be there and everywhere. I'll be there to show I care. I'll be there and everywhere. I'll be there. Reconciling those conflicts with our family members, mending that fence, is being reminded for whom we are there and for those who are there for us. May God's people sing. Amen.